Welcome, everyone. My name is Sylvain Lézé from the Department of Aeronautics at Imperial College London, and this is the new episode of the podcast, Turbulence at the Exascale. So for those who are not familiar with the podcast, we are trying to gather the view of the community regarding exascale computing for turbulence, especially in the UK, and we are trying to identify what are the challenges and opportunities about exascale computing for turbulence research. So this podcast is part of the program called ExCALIBUR, which will run until 2025. And ExCALIBUR is led by the Met Office, the UK Atomic Energy Authority, and the UK Research and Innovation. And its aim is to deliver research and innovative algorithm development to harness the power of exascale computing. So there are currently several working groups, part of the ExCALIBUR project, and I'm leading the one on turbulence. So we are working closely with the UK Turbulence Consortium in particular, because we want to see what needs to be done to our flow solver so that we can have a smooth transition to exascale computing. I'm very pleased to say today that we have international guests from the US, from the National Renewable Energy Lab. And I'm sure you know the NREL. They are working on renewable energy, energy efficiency, energy systems integration, and sustainable transportation. And our two guests are Michael Sprague, who is a senior scientist and group manager in the National Wind Technology Center. He's heavily involved in several wind energy projects in the US. He's also leading various or involved various ExCALIBUR initiatives in the US. And my second guest is Shreyas Ananthan, who is working in the high performance algorithm and complex fluid group at NREL. And he focuses on developing scalable computational methods to work on turbulent flow over complex geometries. So good morning for you, Michael and Shreyas.
Hey, good morning.
I'm very happy to be here with you today. And without further talk from me, I'm going to start asking you a question, and I'm going to start with you, Michael. So for those who don't know you, please can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you're from, what you have studied, and how did you end up working at NREL?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And thanks again for the opportunity to speak on the podcast. I need to make a quick disclaimer and just point out that Shreyas and I work at the National Renewable Energy Lab, and which of course is part of the Department of Energy, the US Department of Energy. And anything we talk about today, it's really just our opinions. It's not meant to reflect anything official about DOE strategy or position or NREL's strategy or position. So there's our disclaimer. So yeah, so as you mentioned, my name is Mike Sprague, and I work at the National Renewable Energy Lab. I started there in 2010. I actually joined in the Computational Science Center, but as my portfolio became more and more wind centric, I moved into the National Wind Technology Center, but my job has effectively not really changed that much. It's just a different center. I grew up in Wisconsin. I came out of the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and then I came to Boulder at the University of Colorado there for my PhD in mechanical engineering. And I did my postdoc there in applied math. And that's where I really got into computational fluid dynamics and modeling for computational fluid dynamics and HPC. After that, I actually did a stint at the University of California in Merced. It was a brand new university then. I was there for 5 years. It was a very interesting, rewarding experience, but I must say I was very happy to go become a researcher in 2010. So maybe I can hand that back to you.
Thank you. And same question for you, Shreyas, if you can tell us a little bit more about you.
Sure. Thank you for having us on this podcast. So my name is Shreyas Ananthan. I was born in India, and I grew up, spent most of my first 24 years of my life in India. And I did my undergrad in IIT Madras. So all through my undergrad, master's and postdoctorate education, I've been in the aerospace engineering specialization. So I've always been involved in fluid dynamics and computational fluid dynamics. So For my master's and PhD, I was doing a lot of fluid structure interaction and helicopter aerodynamics and aeroacoustics research. And then when I moved to postdoc, it was more of, so in PhD, I was doing more of this vortex methods, the reduced order modeling. And then in postdoc, I moved to full CFD with structural coupling and doing aeroacoustics and aerodynamics of maneuvering helicopters. After that, in around 2010, I moved to industry and worked in Vestas, where I was designing wind turbine blades and also doing wind farm flow modeling using open foam, SOFA kind of tool sets, actuator lines, atmospheric boundary layer models to understand sighting issues and also wake issues and underperformance. I spent a few years at US Department of Energy wind program where they were just thinking about high performance computing and the whole, how do we really advance wind energy through high performance modeling and computation. So I helped them put together a program strategy. And then when the Exawin project started at NREL, Mike reached out to me and asked me if I was interested in joining. And I've always been interested in high performance computing, not just the fluid dynamics aspect of it, but also the computational science aspect of it and understanding how to optimize algorithms for different architectures. So this was an opportunity I wouldn't have gotten anywhere else, to be able to play with new machines and try to optimize algorithms. So for the last 4 years, I've been at NREL, working mainly on the high fidelity modeling projects for wind energy, but also doing some amount of machine learning and bringing all the CFD data and figuring out how to use that for reduced order model development and surrogate models. So that's been an exciting time.
Great, thank you. So Michael, you've been working for NREL for quite some time now, and I'm always curious to know what's the best thing about your job and what do you really like about working for NREL?
See, yeah, like I said, I did a stint as a professor or an assistant professor in applied math for 5 years. And when I came to NREL, I think for me, it was a fabulous change. I would say that, the best part about it is the mission space. You just got to feel good going to work and knowing that your prime mission is working on renewable energy or energy efficiency. So since I've been at NREL, I've been had the opportunity to work a bit with researchers in batteries, researchers in biomass, and then of course in wind, plenty of work in wind. So I think the best part, mission space. We get to do computational science, and we get to work on algorithms and HPC, and we get to apply that to problems that are really meaningful and important today. That's got to be the best part. And then just NREL itself. I mean, it's a fabulous place with just great researchers that you get to work with, top-notch people. So I've never looked back on my decision to leave academia and come here to the National Renewable Energy Lab. So yeah, it's been good.
Very good. And same question for you. You spent 4 years, about 4 years at NREL. So what do you like about your current position?
Yeah, I mean, very agree with everything Mike said, right? So the whole making renewable energy and sustainable energy practical and widespread for our energy needs, that's a great job description, right? You can go tell you're saving the world and you're not just joking. So that's a nice feeling. Of course, the NREL being a part of the DOE lab complex, right? So high performance computing really means high performance computing. You get to work on top 10 supercomputers of the world. You're always working on the latest and greatest. So that exposes you to big machines, new machines, new architectures, new challenges. So there is fun doing fluid dynamics and renewable energy, wind energy, but at the same time, there is also this new architecture. It's almost like getting to play with new toys. So that's always
very good.
Fun.
I get your feeling, I think. Right. Let's crack on, Michael, with some question about exascale computing. And my first question is, when at NREL did you start thinking, okay, now we need to start working on the transition to exascale computing? When this switch happened, and how did it happen?
Yeah, so let's see. So around 2014, 2015, I was kind of pulled into it, I'll say. And within the wind program, and Shreyas was part of this when he was at the Department of Energy, was, within the wind program, there was the acknowledgement that high performance computing and really big predictive simulations, so high fidelity modeling and HPC, was really the path forward to take wind energy where it needed to go. And so I got pulled into some workshops in 2015 where we were basically exploring, the opportunities that high performance computing and high fidelity modeling could bring to wind. So we actually had a workshop that was sponsored by the Wind Energy Technologies Office. That was one of the first ones. And right there, we started really speaking explicitly to the fact that if we're going to come onto these next generation platforms, they're going to look very different than what they did in 2014 and 2015, and that our codes need to be ready for that. So that's when I really started getting into it. And later in that same year, the Office of Science sponsored another workshop here in the US, which was the turbulent flow simulations at the exascale workshop. And I had the opportunity to lead that workshop as well. And so that's really where I got into the thick of it, around thinking about next generation computing. And of course, back then we didn't have as much of a clear picture about what computing would look like in the next few years for now, right? I mean, we had a couple of pathways from the vendors, then some of those pathways worked out and others didn't. And now we're looking at a very GPU centric near-term future. But yeah, in 2015, it was really exciting time, because here's this opportunity, and this whole next generation of computing platforms are going to come online. And this, looking at it as tremendous opportunity, but understanding that all these codes that work so great on CPUs and a traditional MPI parallelism, maybe that's not going to work out so great on whatever those next generation platforms would be. We've come a long way since then, and we'll probably talk more about that in a bit. But maybe I'll leave that, answer there for now.
Great, thank you. And so you have been working on this transition to exascale computing since 2015, roughly. And what will you say are the main challenges? Sorry, for let's say for the turbulence community, and maybe for the renewable energy community in particular, so that when exascale computers are going to be available, probably in a year or so, how this is going to work for you guys? Are you going to be able to do what you think you are going to be able to do? And well, what challenges did you face to make sure that you are ready for the first exascale supercomputers?
Yeah, let me see if I can get all of that. And then I'll let maybe Shreyas jump in, for all the things I miss. But, for that workshop we held in 2015, the Office of Science one on exascale computing for turbulent flows, I think a lot of that is still very relevant. The challenges we talk about there are still there. And but I think we're feeling much better about them. The challenges, for example, challenges that exist today, for turbulent flows, I'll say, no matter what the platform, turbulence modeling, I don't think we can lose sight of that. And I think maybe people who aren't in the community don't necessarily appreciate how much turbulence modeling is gonna, affect the success of whatever it is we do, right? I think, turbulence modeling has been around for God knows how long. Mm-hmm. It's so far from being done, right? So I think it's worth always mentioning that, right? We talked about this in 2015, that just because we're going to have this, an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude more flops available to us, that doesn't mean we're going to be that much closer to being able to do direct numerical simulation for, a new slew of problems, for example. I mean, we're going to be able to make only modest gains in DNS. We're going to be able to go to much huger problems. That's the idea. But a challenge there, for example, is still, when you look at exascale computing, you could say, well, we're going to be able to go to much larger problems. So for wind, for example, we think about, well, we're simulating a turbine. Maybe now we're going to be able to simulate a whole farm at very high fidelity, and be able to address all the different multi-scales that are impacting the problem. Of course, still modeling turbulence to a large extent. But, another challenge that you need to think about is when you increase your spatial domain, you're increasing your time horizon as well. Right. So while you have this huge domain, if you're going to do a physically meaningful simulation, that means you're going to have to run for a lot more time steps. And then that always circles back to, well, then it's all about time per time step. And you got to think about, well, we've weak scaled really well, but can we strong scale really well still? So the challenges, around weak scaling, but also strong scaling are always so present. And so much of what we do in our projects are, we have a large team working on linear solvers aspects to really be thinking hard and pushing hard on the strong weak scaling. And especially, of course, as now we're dealing with GPUs. Those are some of the big ones that come to mind. Other challenges that we face right now, back in 2015, we had very different architecture pathways in front of us as potential pathways. Well, now it's GPUs for the foreseeable near future. But we still have flavors of GPUs, right? Mm-hmm. Now we've got vendors who have their own GPUs, and how are we going to be able to make sure that all of our algorithms and all of our software development work is going to be able to work effectively on all these different GPU platforms. So that's an important one that we're still dealing with. We're putting so much effort into getting our codes ready to use GPU acceleration, and it's the great hope that I'm relying on people like Shreyas and other people on the team, to make sure that our efforts are not so specialized that that all is for naught when we change platforms again down the road. Yeah, I could just keep going with all the challenges and opportunities we have for exascale, but maybe I can give Shreyas a chance to, jump in here as well.
Great, thank you very much. So yes, sure. I wanted to ask you, so there's a lot of work put into getting your solvers ready for the exascale era. And so this is maybe a strange question, but let's say if I'm new to the business and I want to get ready, I want to solve the Navier-Stokes equation. What would you say at this point in time is the best strategy if I want to use supercomputers, especially knowing that it's going to be mainly GPUs based? What would you say? What's the best strategy as of today?
So yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there is one silver bullet that, go with this method, you will do everything. But one thing we, at least working on this project and getting codes on GPU, one thing we have realized is data structures are critical, right? The simpler the data, so if you have a structured mesh, or if you have like a simple explicit time stepping algorithm, then you will be able to get very quickly on GPU and make more progress because the code is simpler, the data structure is simpler, it's easier to reason about it. But then again, when we talk about exascale, and as Mike mentioned, you are going to want to do large problems of 50 by 30 kilometer domains for wind farms with 100 turbines, then your time to solution matters, right? So if you have to run about a 10-minute simulation or a 20-minute simulation for the wakes to go through, and you have like 2-3 flow through times in that domain, Then explicit suddenly means you will be running millions and millions of steps. So then you now are forced to go to implicit methods and incompressible flows to remove the acoustic. And then you end up with elliptic solves and the challenges that Mike mentioned with linear solvers, multi-grid. So a lot of the work we've been trying to do is simplify data structure, minimize data movement. So that's the one thing that I would recommend people start from right from the beginning. If they're designing a new code and you have the flexibility, make sure that your data structures, you don't depend on automatic data movement and things like that, because they come to bite you back later in the process. Things that have been really great and worked upon, like multi-grid with symmetric Gauss-Seidel smoothers, they don't work so great in GPUs. So now you have to come up with clever techniques or somehow approximate. So are there techniques you would use to trade off flops? You might not have the best, fastest convergence, but you can do more computation. So you might use a slightly memory efficient algorithm. But so far we haven't hit upon a silver bullet, and that's why this process is so challenging. And another point that Mike brought up, I'll reiterate again, is that the GPUs that are coming out from different vendors are all slightly different, right? So it's not like the code you wrote for Intel CPUs would work almost without modifications in AMD CPUs. It's not exactly sure if that's all going to work out, moving from a V100 to some other architecture from another vendor. That's another challenge. And the simpler your code is, the better you are adapted to moving. We have looked at a lot of abstractions, right? So you write the code in a high-level C++ abstraction, and then you compile it. But at the end of the day, you still have to think about different architectures and how that code might be optimized. So performance abstraction might still not be as simple as code abstractions, right? You can write a for loop that will compile differently in different GPUs, but they might not perform well. So you still have to know your architecture and optimize to it. That's the unfortunate situation right now. And debugging gets much harder. So
obviously. And are you confident? I mean, you are going to have access to the first exascale computers very soon, so much before us. Are you confident that you are going to be ready for those exascale computers? Are you happy with your progress with the software development and things?
Yeah, so we already have access to some pre-exascale systems where we can test our code building and initial performance. And our stack is sort of big compared to, because we have two different solvers, and a structured AMR-based background solver and a non-structured near-body solver. So the structured, as I said, the simpler data structures with the structured background solver has helped us move quickly, and that's all working on all the the pre-exascale systems for both precursors of Aurora and Frontier. So we are quite happy with our progress there, and we are making good progress on the unstructured solver. There again, the data structures. So we are confident that we will run on them, right? And we are confident that we'll be reasonably efficient, but there might be still a lot more work we have to do to get it as fast as what we do with our current present day finely tuned codes on like an x86 architecture, right? So there might still be work done to get it blazing fast, but we are feeling reasonably confident that we will have our entire stack running on the systems because of those abstraction layers and the dedicated code, like the well-designed code practices we put in. So we haven't hard-coded anything to CUDA or like CPU-based threads. We have traded some of the machine efficiency a little bit for the abstraction, just so that we can run on different machines. So I think that trade-off has paid well.
Great. Maybe if I could just add to that.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, we're feeling very good right now, I would say, right? We've done a tremendous amount of work. And again, I'm going to go back to 2015 when we were having these workshops, and within the community, there were a number of individuals who would look at the incompressible solver approach and the need for these global linear solves at every time step, the elliptic systems that we need to solve. And I would say there was a great doubt about how you're going to get these elliptic solvers on the GPUs and make them work fast, right? Especially with all the data movement and so forth. And I will say I'm pleasantly surprised, without showing numbers. I think there's a lot more optimism right now about what can be done. And, yeah, some of my colleagues who were, great naysayers about what it's going to look like for fluid dynamics on GPUs, they were very skeptical. And I think, some opinions are now changing. People are feeling much better. Now, Shreyas made a good point. I mean, from a scientific point of view, you just want the good solution as fast as possible, right? And that comes down to, again, strong scaling. And what does that look like? So as Shreyas said, we're going to keep pushing our strong scaling, our weak scaling as hard as we can on these GPUs. When we talk about GPUs, though, you got to step back a little bit and think maybe it's not just about how fast you can get your solution, but how much energy did it take to get there? Right. And again, when you come back to why we went down this road, it was about the power consumption. Supercomputers use a tremendous amount of energy. And when we were looking at moving to exascale, that was the driver in changing the architectures. Because if you scaled up, if you just scaled up a CPU-based machine from 2010 to an exascale, that I think there's a quote that it would be the Hoover Dam you'd need to power that system. So when we're thinking about the benefits of exascale computing, you got to think about not only about the time to solution, which is super important, but how much energy did it take to get that solution? And I think as we start getting our algorithms, optimized for these GPU systems, it will be really interesting to see how we're doing on a computation for a given amount of energy, for example. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. But I think that even just the straight up time to solution, we're going to be very satisfied with. So
good. So everything is looking good.
We have to say that, by the way. I'm just joking. It is really looking good.
Great, thank you. So Mike, I have a question for you. It's not just, it's more about the US as a country. So you have this exascale computing project initiative. And can you tell us a bit more about how this is working and where this is going to go now that you are about to enter the exascale era?
Yeah, I mean, let's see, I'll do my best there. The exascale computing project, I guess it started in 2017, and it's a massive initiative, without getting dollar amounts, but it's a multi-year. I think it started in 2017 and it goes through 2023. And it involves probably all the national labs, just a huge number of projects. And, at its core, is the acknowledgement that we need the next generation high performance computing at the exascale is going to unlock or solve or advance, many of the problems that we're facing today, right? In energy and so forth, in medicine, you name it, right? So there's this acceptance and acknowledgement that there's this place for high performance computing. And the ECP project, again, acknowledging that exascale computers are going to look very different than CPU only machines. If we built those computers like that and we didn't have all the codes ready to run on them, it would kind of all be for naught. So the exascale computing project, for what we do in it, we're part of the applications group. And there are many beyond wind, about making sure that all those application codes are really, truly ready to run effectively on those systems when they come online. But, again, without getting into numbers, it's a massive, massive effort. If you were to see the annual meeting, the number of people there and so forth, it is really an all hands on deck effort to make sure that we have codes that really can use those exascale machines well.
Okay, and it's for all the field of research. It's not just energy, it's everything, medicine, bio, everything, right?
Yeah, that's right. There's a huge number of application problems. Yeah, physics, astrophysics, energy, right? It's all over the place. And Shreyas, I don't know, are any other interesting ones that come to mind for you on the projects out there?
So, I mean, just wanted to mention that ECP is not just applications, right? There is also the software technology stack that's raising up all the, the software libraries that are the backbone of all these applications, right? So there is a lot more investment on the fundamental libraries and algorithms, not just in PDE type, the fluid type of PDEs, but also big data, machine learning. There are other projects that are trying to assimilate data and make that efficient. So it's a broad initiative, and it's really interesting because we are leveraging a lot of those fundamental technologies in our applications.
Great.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. That's a great point, right? That the software technologies work, a lot of that will benefit the broader community. There's plenty that is open source, that other projects, we're blessed in the sense that we've got an application and we're funded to actually make our application ready for the exascale machines. And like Shreyas said, we're leveraging a lot of work in the software technologies part of the project. But again, anyone can leverage that as well, at least, of course, the open source aspects there. And I'll note that everything we're doing in Exawin is all open source. Everything's on GitHub if you're so interested.
Very good. Good to hear that. And Shrey, I have a follow-up question on that. So you are heavily involved in the Exawin project. So can you tell us more about this one, which obviously is more focused on renewable energy?
Yeah, sure. So Exawin project, our challenge problem or the goal we set out was, can we model wind farm, a reasonably sized wind farm with the highest fidelity models necessary to model all the different length scales and the time scales needed. So when we think about that, atmospheric boundary layer, we have to model all the stability states and the turbulence that's coming in. And then we want to take that all the way down to the turbine scales. What is happening on the blade surfaces? How is that impacting the aerodynamic loading and therefore the structural loading? How are the blades bending and twisting under the influence of aerodynamic loads? What does that mean for fatigue loads? And then if you go further behind the turbine, how are these wakes evolving and breaking down under the influence of atmospheric turbulence? Hitting the next turbine, what is the impact on power performance and fatigue loads? So, and now do this on a complex terrain or a offshore ocean with floating platforms, all sorts of complex dynamics and interactions that all need to be captured together for us to be able to say what is the ground truth of wind farm performance and loads at any given type of atmospheric situation, right? And the codes, as Mike mentioned, we are using incompressible solvers throughout. We have two different solvers, a near body solver, which is unstructured incompressible solver, and a background solver that is structured with adaptive mesh refinement capabilities. So the idea was that we only need to do geometry resolving meshes or, for a small region near the blades. The rest of the domain is just open air. And, even with complex terrain or some kind of wave, ocean waves, it's all, you can just do regular meshes and get a lot more data simplicity and be able to do, things efficiently on this heterogeneous architectures and minimize data movement. And the strategy we are using is what's called an overset mesh methodology, where we use overset algorithms to exchange information between these two solvers. And some of the research that we've been doing is, can we do this and still not break the elliptic pressure Poisson solver? So now you have two different solvers where you're doing structured, unstructured. You want to exploit linear solvers and multi-grid algorithms specific to these kind of meshes and exploit the underlying data structure. But then you're breaking the elliptic solves. Can we make that still stable? So we are trying to figure out efficient algorithms where you can exploit the data simplicity and the physics, underlying physics, but also be mathematically rigorous and consistent. And that's been our work, especially in the Exawin project, and focusing on how do we scale this, both from strong and weak scaling. And one number I've always wanted to put, like Mike mentioned, but we haven't been yet doing that, is this energy consumption. Because you can look at a situation and say, this is not great strong scaling on certain architecture, but it might be consuming a lot less power. And we don't have that number yet. So my ideal goal would be to have like a weak scaling plot, a strong scaling plot, and an energy consumption plot, so that as renewable energy lab, we should be doing the same work with the minimal amount of energy, right? Sort of like we have to prove why we are driving an electric car versus a fossil fuel powered car. So
very good point. Thank you. So obviously, with this is more a question for Mike. We are going to generate a tremendous amount of data with exascale simulation, and I've seen that you have been involved in a project about deep learning for in situ data compression. Can you just briefly, without going into too much detail, can you tell us more about this data compression work?
Yeah, so that work, like I said, I mean, I can't go into details because the real work there was done by Andrew Glaws and Ryan King. So that was recently published. But yeah, that paper hits on one of the challenges we talked about back in 2015. Suddenly, computations of this size, the data sizes that we're going to be dealing with in space and time become pretty outrageous. Billions of degrees of freedom will become more common, and being able to save that data, all of that data obviously is, or even enough of that data may not be possible, right? For what we need to do for addressing our science and engineering questions. So, Andrew and Ryan, they basically looked at, machine learning as a means for in situ compression, right? Trying to find optimal ways to compress the data, right? Either for restarts, right? When we're doing simulations of this size, we are going to need to do our checkpoint restarting. Mm-hmm. And can we use machine learning to more effectively compress that data, right? And again, this is something we talked quite a bit about in 2015. And what are the implications if you restart from a lossy restart file? But their work is very nice. They're really promising on being able to use these neural networks to effectively compress the data. More work is needed, and to understand really what we can get away with these lossy restarts. I think there's a lot that can be done from a scientific perspective with dealing with the compressed data, but the restarts, that more needs to be understood there. So yeah, I think it's a nice paper that they did, and I recommend you check it out.
Fantastic. Yes, I'm sure everyone will. And I can see that we are talking a lot, and I don't want to take too much of your time. So I will have one final question for you both, and I'm going to start with Shreya. So we are talking a lot about exascale computing, but we also need to think about what will happen next. And I wanted to have your view about the future. Do you think we are going to keep having incremental changes? So we are going to still having CPUs with more core, maybe faster, maybe consuming less energy, and the same for GPUs? Or do you think we are going to head for like a mini revolution of some sort with a brand new concept for hardware? I wanted to have your view on that.
So if you look at what's happening already with Google and other companies coming up with this tensor processing units, right? So so we just went from CPUs to GPUs, and now suddenly there is another thing called tensor processing units. And, so if we want to if that's what's happening and that industry is driving that kind of architecture, and if that becomes prevalent because of all the interest in machine learning and this big data kind of computations, where do we as CFD modelers go? Do we, can we exploit these kind of emerging TPU architectures, or are we going to have to resort to CPUs and GPUs? So we just did a big shift to GPUs, but already the emerging GPU are coming up with tensor cores. How do we exploit that? So there are ideas like, multi-precision algorithms to exploit those tensor processing units. And then as we keep going further and further into bigger and bigger problems and, faster and faster computers, are there other ideas, or can we exploit these architectures for turbulence modeling? And is there a hybrid surrogate model for, rather than having constant turbulence coefficients, are there surrogate models that on the fly tune these models based on the aspects of the physics and the local measures? So yeah, regarding hardware, I think there might be another step change, especially when I see this tensor processing units and other things, because it's not just CFD that's driving the hardware architecture, right? There are these other projects and other industries that are pouring billions of dollars into hardware development that is driving things. It's no longer just, can we solve CFD that's driving HPC evolution? So,
great. Is there anything you want to add, Michael, to this?
No, Shreyas answered that pretty well. I guess I'd say that all these PDEs aren't going to go anywhere for a while. I don't think in our lifetimes. I think we're still going to be solving PDEs for our careers, and so I think we're still going to need architectures around that are effective for PDEs. So, and right now I'm just, as PI of the Exawin project, right? I'm very centered on GPUs right now. So I don't think I have anything more to add to what Shreyas said.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for your time and for your input. It was very nice talking to you, and I would like to wish you all the best for all your exascale projects. And I think you are going to be very fortunate in the next few months to be able to try the first exascale computers. So we will be looking forward to hear from you, to see what you can do, what you managed to do, and so on with exascale computers. So thank you very much for your time. That's it for this episode. Once again, if you want to listen to the podcast, I will be putting the links on our Twitter account, UK Turbulence, and you can also find all the links on the UK Turbulence website. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon in a new episode.